Welcome everyone to this Zoom meeting. It's fantastic to see so many of you here from all over the UK and further afield. My name is Russell Whiting. I'm the Development Manager at Christian CND, and I'm going to be your host this evening. We have got a packed agenda over the next 2 hours, and we've got a lot of fantastic stuff to get through. So it's great to have you here. Many of you will know that this meeting was originally scheduled to take place in July last year, and that it was supposed to be held in Methodist Westminster Central Hall, which is obviously a very significant place within the peace movement and within the Christian peace movement specifically. Now, although we can't be there this evening, we have been sent a greeting from the Reverend Tony Miles, who is at Westminster Hall. So we're going to start our evening with.
I'm Tony Miles, the Superintendent Minister here at Methodist Central Hall, Westminster, and I had hoped to be able to welcome you in person, but sadly the pandemic has meant that this 60th anniversary of Christian CND has had to move online, and also on a date when I can't actually be with you. Nevertheless, as CND was launched, its first meeting was here in this great hall in 1958. And so I'm absolutely delighted to be able to greet you on your special occasion on behalf of my colleagues, the conference centre here, and the church that's at the heart of this wonderful building. For those who are unaware, on the 10th of January 1946, in a world that was convalescing from the horrors of a world war, the inaugural meeting of the United Nations General Assembly took place here at Methodist Central Hall, Westminster. Unscathed by the war, this building was an ideal choice to host the General Assembly. The trustees at the time, though, had to be persuaded by the Foreign Minister Ernest Bevin to vacate the premises. He said that there could be no better place than a house of God with an atmosphere of prayer that was already there. The Reverend Dr. William Sangster and his congregation then vacated the building. And they went to the Victoria Palace and then to the London Colosseum because the Victoria Palace wasn't big enough for the congregation. This hall was then redecorated. Seating was removed, carpets were laid, and translation booths were installed as well. Tables 40 foot long were put in place for the delegations of over 51 nations that were attending. The first resolution of the UN General Assembly was on the 24th of January 1946, and it included proposals for, and I quote, the elimination from national armaments of atomic weapons. It was unanimously accepted. And then in the 1950s, when Europe was gripped by a very real fear of nuclear conflict, CND was launched, building on the earlier work of anti-war movements. And it all began with a public meeting here on the 17th of February 1958. Thousands of people crammed into this great hall with 4 overflow halls, all wanting to campaign for nuclear disarmament. Later, on the 13th of November 1961, there was another meeting at the Royal Albert Hall, and there the playwright and novelist J.B. Priestley was one of the speakers. From the very beginnings of CND, Christians have been involved. In fact, I'm told Canon Collins from St Paul's Cathedral was its chair. And it was a natural progression for Christian CND to form in 1960 as a specialist section of CND and reporting to its AGM. The aim? To follow the example and life of Jesus Christ, and in doing so, take the aims and objectives of CND into the Christian community. CND members believe that this is part of their Christian vocation. So as you meet here today for your conference, or wherever you are watching this, may I offer MCHW's belated congratulations for your 60th anniversary. Please be assured of our prayers for your online gathering and for your ongoing endeavour as well. And may the Prince of Peace enable this meeting to be an instrument of peace, and enable us all to be peacemakers, practicing tolerance and living together in peace with one another as good neighbours. May God richly bless you all.
So I think that's a really great way to start off proceedings. And as Tony said during that session, the United Nations, of course, is a key part of its history, is at Methodist Central Hall, Westminster. And so we thought it would be a good opportunity to reflect on some of the values of the United Nations and some of the key people there today. So we asked Ben Donaldson, who many of us will know from the UN Association UK. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to join us, but he has also sent us a video recording.
Thank you for asking me to speak today, and congratulations to CCND for their 60 years of work for nuclear disarmament. My name is Ben Donaldson and I work for the United Nations Association UK. As an organisation, we are proud to have been working as part of the UK peace movement throughout those 60 years, plus a few more since our founding alongside the birth of the United Nations in 1945. Now, I've been asked to speak for 5 minutes about the values of Sir Brian Urquhart and Antonio Guterres. This is quite a tough gig. They are both very different UN diplomats, but I accepted the challenge because I think we can learn something from their different approaches and also get some clues as to how the UN may evolve in Guterres' second term as UN Secretary General. For those who are not aware of Sir Brian Urquhart, he was the UN's second employee. He was a British citizen who had a towering influence on the institution and the work of the UN over his 4-decade career at the heart of global diplomacy. He passed away at the beginning of this year, aged 101. Now, Sir Brian was renowned as the UN's top troubleshooter and someone that managed to combine pragmatism while remaining firm on his principles and his ideals. Clearly, the couple of minutes I have to speak about Sir Brian is not sufficient to scratch beneath the surface, but as a starting point, I would say there are 2 things that you need to know about Sir Brian that massively shaped his outlook. Firstly, his role as an intelligence officer in World War II. Now, when the tides were turning for the Allies in late 1944, he was helping to prepare a huge operation to parachute behind enemy lines. And later in preparations, Brian sounded the alarm based on intelligence of an unexpected German military presence near Arnhem, where his division were planning to land. For pointing out this inconvenient truth, Sir Brian was ordered to take sick leave while the operation went ahead as planned. Almost 3/4 of his division were killed, missing or captured, and hopes of an early Allied victory were thwarted. This folly was immortalised in the film A Bridge Too Far. Reflecting on this episode, Sir Brian said it gave him the lifelong conviction that it is never too late to act, but also that it made him deeply sceptical about the behaviour of leaders. And this remains depressingly relevant to today, with today's crop of political egos. In Sir Brian's memoirs, he wrote that I never again could be quite convinced that wisdom and principle were a match for vanity and ambition. He added, the worst way to make an argument is by reason and good information. You must appeal to people's emotions and to their fears of being made to look ridiculous. So this gives us an idea about his pragmatic streak and where that could have come from. But his principles and ideals were also shaped by his military experience, by witnessing the very worst that mankind is capable of. As the first Allied officer into Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, he was not prepared for what he saw. He described bodies as far as the eye could see, only unlike battlefield deaths, no sickly smell to accompany them. They were, he wrote, literally skin and bone. And he remarked that it was so overwhelmingly monstrous that normal emotions just shut down, and instead he just described being consumed with rage at the deliberate spectacle of human degradation. So throughout the following 40 years, he worked ceaselessly for the creation of an organization, a peace organization that could rein in the worst instincts of mankind. And he saw the folly of competitive nationalism and knew that civilization needed a rulebook beyond national law based on shared humanity and fairness, and that such a system would be required to maintain any semblance of world peace. As a pragmatist, he knew that there would be times when this rulebook, i.e. the UN Charter and the system of treaties we have today, he knew there would be times when this rulebook would be ignored. But It was the fact that these shared rules were there, that they existed, and that was what counted, meaning those who transgressed had to do so in contradiction to their own international commitments, and with global opinion more easily able to bear down on them and rein them in. Sir Brian was deeply involved in the UN's work to reduce nuclear risks, including by masterminding the establishment of the UN's nuclear watchdog, the IAEA. He also saw up close the UN's role in preventing a civilization-ending use of force, particularly through the Cuban Missile Crisis under Third Secretary General U Tant. On this, he noted the importance of the UN for its ability to provide a face-saving mechanism, a ladder from which the two superpowers could and eventually did descend from their potentially catastrophic confrontation. At UNA UK, we recognise Sir Brian's immense contribution to global peace and his career-long spirit of international public service by giving a prize in his name each year to somebody who has made an outstanding contribution to the United Nations. See on our website una.org.uk for more details, as well as for our work on nuclear disarmament. I also urge you to read Sir Brian's autobiography, or any of his writings really, firsthand, because his wisdom, his wit, his writing style really needs to be enjoyed straight from the source to get the full impact. Now, David also asked me to say something very brief about the values of the current SG, Antonio Guterres, who was appointed for another 5 years as UN leader very recently. Now, saying something succinct on this is not an easy task. He made good strides in a few directions in his first term, such as reaching gender parity in senior appointments, modest managerial reforms, and getting the political and peace-building operations of the UN working more closely together. He also undoubtedly channels some of Sir Brian's ethos for public service, and during his hearing in front of the General Assembly back in May, he went out of his way to explain his personal motivations to serve another term, and he spoke specifically about his privilege and his desire to use that privilege to help those less fortunate than himself. He also outlined his desire for a surge in diplomacy and cooperation to address inequality, as well as what he calls the irrational, even nihilistic belief systems spreading fear and denying science and truth. So that gives some clues as to where he wants to take his second term. But while Mr. Guterres' commitment is not in doubt, it is difficult from his first term to define a clear set of values that may drive his second term. True, he has spent a lot of the last 5 years weathering the storm of Trump and coronavirus, but there still has been a very clear tendency for sort of quiet diplomacy and not speaking out about abuses being committed by states under his watch. And this has frustrated many. For example, Human Rights Watch would have called on him to put human rights far further up his agenda. And international lawyer Mona Ali Khalil summed this up well when she said that Guterres is widely regarded as bending to the principle of power, not standing for the power of principles. But now it's not Trump, but now Guterres no longer has Trump in his way, and he no longer has to think about keeping the powerful countries on side, which hold the keys to his reappointment. So as we head towards another 5 years with the UN under Guterres' leadership, I hope to see a more outspoken, principled Guterres who will make much better use of his public profile and the mediation possibilities that come with the office of UN Secretary General. I just wanted to end by recognizing the incredible work that CCND and other faith and disarmament movements are doing here in the UK, and hope that you can all take some inspiration from Sir Brian's lifelong dedication to pragmatic peace building, and also some hope from the new UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which we hope Guterres will make a major focus of his second term. UNA UK looks forward to working together across the UK nuclear disarmament community, including through the ICANN network. So please follow ICANN UK on Twitter or join the mailing list if you're not already on it. Thank you for asking me to contribute. I wish you good luck with the rest of this event and for all your work going forwards. Thank you very much.
That's great. So a little flavour there of two figures from the history of the United Nations. But actually, one of the things that we are here to celebrate, of course, is the 60th anniversary of Christian CND. And last year, we were really privileged that we had Sue Gilmurray and Christopher Idle write a new hymn, especially for the occasion of our 60th birthday. I'm sure we've all heard it at least once. Many of us have heard it more than once and enjoyed it. So we're going to listen to it now with a montage of some of the pictures of the last 60 years. The lyrics do come up on the screen, so please feel free to join in, but please, we ask you to stay muted because different people's internet is different quality, and it gets very loud and a cacophony of noise very quickly.
Let us raise our voice for the sake of the planet, for the earth we love, to be free from fear. We will take a stand for our friends and neighbors. Neither bomb nor gun shall infect us here. Let us join the march for the sake of our children and a future hope that can still be theirs. We will walk the miles with a mind to make it. We will sing our songs, we will breathe our prayers. Let us set our goals for the sake of the needy. Let us persevere though the road seems long. We reject all faith in the stockpiled weapons. We will speak the truth to the rich and strong. Let us plead our cause for the sake of the nations, with the Lord's great love still at large today. We will wear the badge of our clear commitment as we tread the path on the pilgrim way. Let us trust in God for the sake of the kingdom. Let us take the cross into every place. We will look to Christ for his fruitful spirit, building peace on earth by his boundless grace.
I think you'll agree that's a wonderful hymn and a rousing way to look forward to the next few years of our campaigning. Now, the eagle-eyed among you will have spotted that one face appeared in those pictures perhaps more than any other, and that is, of course, Bruce Kent. And so, along with Valerie Flessati, who wrote a fantastic book about Christian CND, I think for our 50th anniversary, we asked them if they would be willing to share some of their thoughts and reflections and memories from the history of Christian CND. So I'm going to pass over to Valerie and Bruce now.
Is it all right to start?
Please, Bruce.
I can start. Well, I'm really in antiquity. I don't really belong here at all. I started off in a very warlike life. Cadet corps in school. I was an excellent bugler once when I was 14 years old, and then went on to be a proper cadet in a boarding school. And every meal I had in the big dining room, we had 8 holders of the Victoria Cross on a portrait. So we were not a peaceful lot, really. We were quite warlike, and everybody went into conscription, and as I did, and it was a normal thing to do. So we had. How on earth did I get involved in CND, which I did? How did I get involved? Well, I was ordained as a Roman Catholic priest and went to a parish and became the director of a youth club. And I saw some nice outings that somebody called Pax Christi, I never heard of. Pax Christi had organized. And so I got some of my youth to go on these outings, pilgrimages in the summer, and it went down very well. And about a week later, a man came and said, would I mind being the chaplain to Pax Christi? Well, I thought that's pretty rapid promotion. But anyway, that's where I ended up with Pax Christi. And it wasn't until much later when I bumped into CND, and I bumped into CND in a very aggressive way because I was busy marrying people on the Monday morning of August the 29th and Easter Monday, and I had about 6 or 7 brides to deal with, and they were all late. Everybody was late, and I was furious. I expected people to be on time. And I asked why were they all late? And they said because some lot called CND are walking down Kensington High Street and blocking up the traffic. And I thought, well, bloody hell, who the hell does CND think they are if they can interrupt with my weddings? So that's how my introduction to CND. But I wore off my hostility later on when I met an absolutely marvelous Jesuit called Thomas Roberts, who wasn't very popular with the other bishops. But he said to me about nuclear weapons, he said, look here, Bruce, are you willing at some stage to press a button to kill hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians? And I said, well, no, but no one's ever put that to me. He said, well, that's what nuclear weapons are, mass killing of innocent people. Do you agree with that? I said, no. And that began my downhill slope into CND. And I became then a chaplain or something, I've forgotten what, in CND. But CND in the 60s was going downhill, in the 50s was going downhill quite rapidly. It wasn't a big organization anymore. The Vietnam War came along and took a lot of interest and so on. So we had committee meetings of about 7 people in a convent in Euston, and that was CND's national figure. So the Polaris submarine was the thing that drew our focus, and I did go up to Faz Lane, to Polaris, and operated strongly up there with taking holy water and blessing the base and exorcism, what I call the devil out of the base. Well, that didn't go down very well, I can tell you, with Catholic right-wingers. Who's he talking about a devil? So that was the early stage. And CND took off radically in the beginning of the 80s with the cruise missile crisis and everything. And suddenly we were landed in Hyde Park facing 100,000 or at least many thousand people in Hyde Park, packed out. And so that's when the CND that I joined really flourished in a big way and spread all around the country, Wales, Scotland, all over the place. People taking direct action, people going to prison, all very heroic stuff, a lot of people involved. But at that stage, I've now done more than my 5 minutes. I'm passing on for the rest of the story to someone who knows it better than me, and that is Valerie Frassati. You can applaud now if you want to.
Thank you. So we've been asked to share some memories of the past 60 years. Well, I don't go quite back that far with Christian CND, but I've chosen a few photographs to try and share of events that stick in my memory, and I expect they'll prompt some for you too. So I'm going to share my screen with these pictures. Okay, so this was my first demonstration, and it was actually a Christian CND event down at Porton, which was the research establishment, British research establishment, not for nuclear, but for chemical and biological warfare. And this event was in May, Whitsun 1970, and it was led by a Dominican called Father Simon Blake. And I remember a freezing night spent on plane, but in 1972, a convention on the prohibition of biological weapons came into being. This was a big international issue. So that's the first of my picture memories. These ones I've chosen because this was when, in 1973, we went up to Faslane at Easter and performed a ceremony of exorcism and purging, which Bruce just referred to. O Lord, remove the spirit of evil from this place, from weapons of murder, save, O Lord, your people. And for me, this represents something that Christians have brought into CND as a whole, a new way of looking at things, also naming the evil of nuclear weapons for what it is. And my third couple of pictures are from the 1980s, and these are to represent the very heady and exhilarating times that many of you will remember too, when Christian CND could assemble 900 people in Coventry Cathedral, or 2,000 Christians to encircle the Ministry of Defence with a peace ribbon, including a large number of members of different religious congregations. So what has Christian CND offered us? Well, a lot of very formative experiences that shaped us. We learnt to organise quite large field events with all the skills that needed. We'd arrive at some military base, usually in the middle of the countryside in all weathers. There was always a very good spirit, a sense of purpose and solidarity, plus the sheer enjoyment of meeting up with friends from all over the country. Christian CND applies our Christian tradition to urgent defence issues by holding our events at significant dates in the Christian calendar, like Ash Wednesday and Easter and Pentecost, etc. And we use symbols and liturgical drama, holding up the white crosses against the cruise missile convoys, or sprinkling ashes on runways and the Ministry of Defence itself. I also remember a lot of people. For me, the most notable was who became the Christian CND organizer in 1982. She was an exceptional leader, creative, imaginative, articulate with the media, fearless in both dialogue and resistance, and with a sense of enthusiasm and fun that drew people into it, whether they were Christian or not. I remember a lot of volunteers like Christoph Baschan, a young German who came to Christian CND from the Action Reconciliation movement for conscientious objectors. Volunteers who came via the Brethren Church in the United States. I remember a man called Fred, who invented those folding white crosses, which were so handy on public transport. Angela and Helen, who camped at Molesworth with their multicoloured caravan. And wonderful stalwart campaigners like Bobby and Margaret Harrison from Dumbarton, who we used to look out for in Scotland. I remember inspiring speakers like Father George Zabelka, the former US chaplain to the atomic bombing crew, or atom bomb survivor Setsuko Furlow. So what a privilege to work alongside those sort of people. One of the times that Christian CND contributed most to CND events was in the days of massive demonstrations. The organisers could rely on a large, disciplined Christian contingent who would maintain a spirit of unity and non-violence, whatever the provocation, and who had a repertoire of good songs. Sometimes even the police joined in. I was thinking recently about the best marching hymns, and the most stirring included Be Not Afraid, Walk in the Light, and All Over the Land, the Spirit is Moving. Do you know, I think those are rather good messages to carry in our heads as we continue our campaigning journey today. So congratulations to everyone on 60 years of hard work. On we go.
Wonderful. Thank you, Valerie and Bruce, for some of those memories and the pictures. And I'm sure we all look forward to the times when we can gather thousands again, although of course we're disappointed that we still have to, and we'd much rather we were able to be doing something else. Now we are going to move on to our first speaker this evening. Valerie and Bruce talked a lot there about the motivation for being involved with Christian CND. And so it's a great thrill for us to have with us this evening the Reverend Dr. Inderjit Bogar, who I'm sure many of us will know as minister and theologian and honorary president of the Fellowship of Reconciliation. Reverend Inderjit is going to speak to us about Jesus's message of peace and how we can reflect that today. So Reverend Bogar, over to you.
Hi, thank you, Russell. I greet you all in the name of Christ and wish upon you the peace and blessings of God. I want to say to you, I'm speaking from a very remote retreat house where I'm speaking later. And the only place where I could get signal is in the reception of the conference. So there may be a bit of traffic, but I think they're all aware that I'm speaking to you. So just be aware of that. But thank you for inviting me to share with you this evening. And thank you, Christian CND, for all you do to uphold the witness for a nuclear-free world of peace. Congratulations on your 60th anniversary. I applaud you in all that you do. Lovely to see some familiar faces there. I greet you and others who are new to me. Bruce, good to hear you and see you. You may recall 40 years ago, I shared on a platform with you in Wolverhampton when Wolverhampton Groups for Peace and the Wolverhampton Interfaith Group organized a peace rally, and we filled the City Hall, and I shared the platform with you, and I've never forgotten that, and you've been a great inspiration, and thank you and bless you. It troubles me deeply that UK government continues to consistently vote against the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, while a huge majority of people in this country want the government to sign the treaty. And it is scandalous that 9 countries spent $72 billion on nuclear weapons last year, and that's almost $140,000 every minute. What a waste of money, and we can't afford that. It is more sensible to invest in products that are good for people and help to build a better world. And in the context of global pandemic, it's better to fund medical care and research and to ensure everybody gets vaccination. So Jesus's values, this is bread and butter to you. You all know this, but I'm just going to give you my spin. Jesus wept. If only you knew the things that make for peace, is said. Well, without going into the original intention of these words, what are the things that make for peace? And what may be the distinctive contribution of the followers of Jesus and of the gospel of Christ to the work of peace today? So I want to share with you my reflections in the context of the gospel of Christ, upholding reconciliation and peace. Here is a model in Christ on which to fashion our lives, or as we read in Philippians chapter 1, verse 27, so live your lives in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. What does that mean? Well, for me, there are 4 key elements in the gospel of Christ: incarnation, the birth, affirming God is with us; the ministry of Christ, a ministry of hospitality and healing; crucifixion, recognizing the passion, pain, and the cost of anything that's worth doing; and resurrection, embracing hope, new life, and new direction always. So first, and briefly, incarnation, God is with us. This is the good news of the gospel. God is one and is one with people, with all our immense diversity, without discrimination. In love, forgiveness, grace, and generosity, God reaches out to a fallen, failing, frail, selfish humanity And God honors all people, for all people are made in the image of God. In Christ, the work of reconciling the world to himself, that God's work of reconciling the world to himself is proclaimed to be complete. It is work that has been done. God reflects the humility of taking the first step in reconciliation without counting human trespasses against them and entrusting the message of reconciliation to us. In the birth of Christ, God embraces the powerlessness and vulnerability of a newborn child. A child is born with empty hands. The first requirement in any movement of peace is the humility of emptiness. Weapons put away, reaching out with empty hands, hands of prayer. I like Charles Wesley's hymn, "Let earth and heaven combine," and especially the lines, "He deigns in flesh to appear, widest extremes to join." We focus on those words, widest extremes to join. It is possible for God and humanity to be joined, to be one. Widest extremes can join. When Nelson Mandela became the black president of South Africa, he made his former enemy, F.W. de Klerk of the National Party, his deputy. Remember that handshake between two extreme enemies, Ian Paisley and Martin McGuinness, at the beginning of the Good Friday Peace Agreement in Northern Ireland? People of widest extremes can be friends, can be reconciled, and can work together. And we, as people of any nation, any church denomination or congregation, we are a mixture of people and of many ethnicities and of many tribes. And we all have our range of diversities, not least the widest extremes in terms of theology. With our diversity, we are called and committed to a ministry of constructive dialogue and reconciliation, and we want to enable each other to grow and flourish in our relationships. And we always do this in humility, in the confidence and the strength of the good news that God is with us. And when we take the path of reconciliation, of bringing together people, we are always taking God's path. That's the path of holiness. Second, the ministry of Christ. We emulate the ministry of Christ, a ministry of hospitality and healing, not of hatred and hurting. The ministry and practice of Christ was characterized by being hospitable and a healing presence. Jesus had a ministry of hospitality and healing, not harming and hurting. His ministry is revealed as a ministry of mending hurts, doing good, including the outsider, welcoming the stranger, clothing the naked, visiting the sick and those in prison, sharing food with the hungry and water with the thirsty. Jesus was born with empty hands, and we never hear of him carrying anything in his hands. He was certainly free of weapons, and he kept an open table. He welcomed all to eat with him, and he especially welcomed those who felt most excluded by social, religious, or political discrimination. In the ministry of peace and reconciliation, it is essential to build shared, safe spaces where people of different backgrounds can meet, listen to each other in dialogue, share our brokenness and hurt, and feel each other's points of hurt and grief. This is relevant in our world characterized by increased military budgets. We are spending far too much on military, and that cost cannot be justified in our world of hunger and harm. We need hospitals and homes and school and health. War as a strategy has failed and is an out-of-date approach to conflict resolution. 90% of the world's refugees are from countries in or close to conflict and war. This madness has to end. So we call for commitments and actions that are consistent with the hospitable and healing ministry and practice of Jesus Christ. Hospitality is always a two-way process and offers a better way to respond to difference, to transcend social borders and express respect, especially for the most excluded from the benefits of belonging. Hospitality offers bread, not bullets and bombs. Hospitality is a way of non-violence, seeking to bring all participants in any conflict to the table of hospitality and shared dialogue. That's protective hospitality, not patronizing hospitality. And this is the theology which is at the root of the city of sanctuary idea, which I initiated in my ministry in Sheffield a few years ago. A simple idea, which is a contemporary expression of the ancient Hebrew concept of cities of refuge. And Sheffield became UK's first city of sanctuary in the year 2007. Today, there are over 120 cities and towns and villages working with that model of building cultures of welcome and hospitality. And it's moved on to schools of sanctuary, hospitals of sanctuary, universities of sanctuary, theatres of sanctuary, and so on. And I'm trying to encourage churches to take it up and to become churches of sanctuary. And there are scores of Quaker meeting places of sanctuary. So just have a look at the website to see how it all works. And you can look at my personal website to get more ideas as well. And I've put a little booklet together called Hospitality and Sanctuary for All, which you can obtain from Churches Together in Britain and Ireland or from me. So the third thing to focus on in the gospel is the witness to crucifixion, reflecting the passion and cost of the cross. The message of the cross is that nothing worth doing is without personal cost. There is a cost involved in exercising the ministry of peace and reconciliation. Jesus was tortured and persecuted and rejected. Jesus died, denied, betrayed, and abandoned even by his best friends. He reflects not only humility, but he takes on humiliation. Being peacemakers and people of reconciliation will not bring you necessarily to a peaceful and tranquil life. Peace building and reconciliation is hard work and a long road. The ministry of reconciliation and peace is costly, and you will have your opponents. Think about the people best remembered for their non-violence teaching: Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi, Oscar Romero. They were all killed by their opponent. Non-violence is considered by many people to be a very dangerous development. In a speech in Belfast in 2013, at which I was present, Barack Obama said it is harder work to make peace. This is certainly the experience of peace and reconciliation workers in Northern Ireland, and they all knew what Obama was saying. All peace activists know this. So peacemaking is not a soft option. It is a long and winding road, a long-term and difficult task. It requires hard listening and conversation. The road is not smooth. It is uneven. It is crooked. This is the uneven ground on which strangers and friends, families and familiar faces cross over to meet each other, to address matters of justice with mercy and humility. It is gospel wisdom that we have to bear the cross. It is the pathway to resurrection and hope. With the cross at the center of our existence, we are called to model leadership that handles power with redemptive power and with the capacity to share and to give up power, always seeking to empower others. So fourthly, then resurrection and the hope held and proclaimed in the resurrection. The resurrection stories in the gospel insist that there is always a good way ahead. There is always more. We're never at the dead end. Resurrection calls us to never give up hope, always to remain hopeful, even in the worst of circumstances. We acknowledge that the wounds of the past can never be covered up and hidden. The resurrection narrative recognizes this as the risen Christ invites Thomas to reach out and touch the scars of his wounds in his hands and side. Wounds can heal, but the scars and the marks of hurt remain, and these have to be acknowledged. In the depths of the scandal of apartheid, Archbishop Desmond Tutu insisted that good will overcome, that truth will not be suppressed by falsehood. And I recall him and his colleagues challenging the might of South African military with Bibles in their hands. And he used to say to the apartheid government, "You may have guns, you may have all this power, but you have already lost. Come, join the winning side." But he never lifted a weapon. Reflect on your life and all the situations in which you feel you may be at your wits' ends, at a dead end, stuck, not sure which way to turn next. Well, the gospel insists, do not despair or give in, always remain hopeful. Resurrection proclaims that there is a way out of the impasse. According to John's gospel, as you know, the disciples had been fishing, had nothing to show for all their efforts. They were ready to give up, but in the wisdom of Christ, they were shown a way forward. The ministry of reconciliation brings the confidence that new beginnings are possible, even in the most difficult and painful contexts. It is a ministry that never ends, that never gives up, and always keeps hope alive. And reconciliation will bring us to new creation and to new life. These, my friends, are the four movements of the gospel that encapsulate the distinctive mission and ministry expressed and exercised in the name of Christ. The methodology of resurrection, the ministry of Christ of hospitality and healing, the cross and the cost of discipleship, the resurrection hope of new life and direction. It is a ministry strengthened and sustained by the Holy Spirit of God. So I want to conclude now with just a comment on reconciliation. From beginning to its conclusion, the Bible records and reflects God's work of reconciliation in the history of a people on a journey, constantly desiring nothing less than the restoration and the renewal of the relationship with God within their own being and their relationships. But ultimately, it is about the renewal of all creation. There is an inseparable link between reconciliation and the stories of creation, crucifixion, and the consummation of all creation. And God is calling us to share in this work, to uphold reconciliation and peace, and to make a contribution and to play our part, and to value the contribution of others. So we dare to dream and to hope of a different society, a decent society, where all people can be safe, flourish, and have equal opportunity, and enjoy the fullness of life, where different parties can agree to be in an open and honest relationship in which they can share openly, honestly, in what are undoubtedly difficult conversations. A reconciled society will not be one without differences and disagreements, but it will be one where division is not destructive because there is a shared commitment to the enhancement of life for all. The gospel of Christ expresses confidence in God, who is revealed in Christ's birth, ministry, crucifixion, and resurrection. This does not allow us to support violence as a means to building a better world. In Jesus is revealed a way to non-violence, non-violent protest. Put away your sword, he said, and took on the principalities and the powers of the world, and showed the strength that there is in powerlessness and taking on suffering. Learn the true meaning of what it is to love your enemies and to pray for those who persecute you. And remember his words, inasmuch as you do it, to those considered to be the least important and the most on the margins, you did it to me. This is the measure of a good lifestyle. So, my friends, continue to live your life as ambassadors of the gospel ministry of reconciliation and peace, and encourage this life in all life and conflict at local and wider level. And you will play your part in the future, as you have done in the past, to build a better world. Thank you and bless you all. Remain strong, and the strength of God be with you.
Thank you so much, Indrajit. That's a wonderful message for us of Jesus's message and everything that we are trying to do. And I think that is something that will challenge and encourage us all. And I saw many people feverishly taking notes, and I know will certainly be watching that again, because there was so much in there. So thank you for that. We are now going to share a short video from an organisation that many of us in Christian CND are familiar with and admire, and that's Peace Child. They've been doing some fantastic work, often in difficult circumstances, to try and bring peace. David Walcombe, who actually features in this video, is here and is in the chat. So if you have any questions that crop up during the video, then please feel free to type them. He has shared some links to wider videos and more information, but we'll be sending around an email after the meeting where we can collate all that information, so you don't need to worry about that too much. So I will share my screen and then we will watch this short video from Peace Child.
David Walcombe, and I'm really pleased to bring you this short presentation about Peace Child's efforts to eliminate nuclear weapons. President Lincoln said, "You can't destroy an enemy by killing him. That only makes more enemies. The only way to destroy an enemy is to make him your friend." That has always been the rationale of Peace Child, as this introduction video from the 1980s will show you.
What is Peace Child? Where did it come from? The show was born in England in 1981 as a celebration of peace for United Nations Week. It tells the story of Soviet and American children who meet and initially find common ground through their fear of nuclear war.
I don't want to die. I want to live. I want to live. I want to go off and lead a full life.
They become friends and get on television, and eventually, after many adventures, are the catalysts that bring about peace between their two nations.
I want to live. I want to live.
A year later, the play premiered in North America at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. And finally, in the summer of 1985, the play was performed in the Soviet Union.
Я жить хочу, хочу я жить.
Peace Child was something of a hit in the USSR. The sight of Soviet and American children singing Peace Child songs together, now newly translated into Russian, proved irresistible to Soviet audiences. The cast even got on the primetime nightly news with the Soviet equivalent of Dan Rather. In 1986, American children were there again, receiving the same enthusiastic, warm receptions everywhere they went. But getting Soviet children to come to the United States, that was much harder. It had never happened before. The appeal to leaders to introduce large systems of youth exchange has always been part of a Peace Child play.
We want you to begin a system in our schools so that all children can have the chance to learn to love each other, as we have done.
And in 1986, the Soviet authorities said yes to Peace Child. 10 Soviet and 12 American children toured a dozen North American cities in the first ever joint Soviet-American musical theater production.
So you get the picture. Youth exchange through musicals, easing tensions, helping to end the Cold War. That's what citizen diplomacy was all about, and Peace Child was a big part of that back in the 1980s. It helped reduce the number of nuclear weapons from 70,000 then to 13,500 now. That's still far too many. So we're still working on strengthening those friendships. And at the Moscow end, my friend Stas Namin is developing a whole new peace child show called Strike, which premieres in October. I asked Stas if he thought the situation now is worse or better than it was back when we were working in the 1980s on the first peace child.
I'm afraid it's worse. It's actually very difficult to do anything because the power of negative is very serious. It's like mob. And we're doing now that second part of Peace Child story, as you know, which is called Strike. And it's about the most difficult, most dangerous problems of survival of human being. At the end, yes, they will hear, they will look at young people and will maybe formally, but try to understand what they need and what they want. But still, problems are not escaping. It's just the way how to fight with them, because it's, you know, our choice just to do nothing and not to fight and not to fight for our future, or do something and there is a chance that we will win in some way.
So Stas is a bit secretive about his script, which is fine, but I'm currently working with a task force of young people here in the UK and around the world to put together a new Peace Child story, Peace Child 2.0. I asked one of that task force, 18-year-old Lauren Banham, the same question as I asked Stas.
Am I hopeful that our generation can create change that will eliminate nuclear weapons? Yes. I believe that my generation's ability to create solutions and to unite against an issue, or to unite against oppression and against the violence incited by nuclear weapons, I believe that this generation has the ability to create solutions against that, to create solutions that will eliminate nuclear weapons. Am I hopeful that that can occur under particular leadership at the moment and particular systems that we operate in? Perhaps not so much, but am I hopeful that my generation can come up with solutions and can create new systems in which change is effective and possible? Yes, I am. And would it be, you know, an absolute victory if we could eliminate nuclear weapons? Yes, and I 100% believe that this generation has the ability and the passion and the drive to do so.
The mission of Peace Child remains to empower young people to fulfill their potential economically and socially without damaging the fabric of the world in which they and their descendants must live. We've seen young people can transform the world, and we'll continue to empower and try to enable them to do so through making friendships like these.
Tasha.
So who's that?
This is my friend Natasha. She's from Moscow. She's 10 years old.
How do you guys communicate?
She doesn't speak English, and we communicate with our hands. I know a little Russian. She knows like little English.
How do you talk with your hands? Give me an example.
I'm sad. I'm happy. You know, I can use some of the words I've used. Many people. I'm very curious about the Russian language. I think it's very beautiful. And so I ask a lot of my friends on the bus, and they teach me a lot of phrases. Which means little kids always ask, why? And the mother goes, because, why, ends in why.
Why do you think it's war?
Because our countries don't understand each other. I didn't know anything about the Soviet Union when I was on the plane, but I've learned so much, and you know, I mean, look, we're all friends.
I have the
We're going to kick off the final part of our evening this evening with a message from a dear friend of Christian CND who can't be with us this evening, unfortunately, but that is the Right Reverend Stephen Cottrell, the Archbishop of York. We'll all know that he was integral to the Church of England passing its motion at General Synod in 2018 in support of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and he has been a friend of ours for many years and has continued that whilst being the Archbishop of York.
It's a great honour to have this opportunity to address this conference and to thank all of you who work and are part of the Christian campaign for nuclear disarmament. You don't need me to tell you that there are all sorts of reasons for opposing nuclear weapons. There are legal reasons, and the recent decision by our government seems to me and to many to be in contravention of our responsibilities and undertakings under the 1970 Non-Proliferation Treaty, and of course now we're also living happily with the United Nations Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which is the first multilateral and legally binding instrument for nuclear disarmament that has been negotiated for 20 years. And I believe it marks a turning point by redefining global attitudes towards nuclear weapons and establishing what I believe should be, must be, a new international norm. You know, from now on, the very possession of nuclear weapons will be regarded by the nations of the world not just as immoral, but as illegal. And the conversation on nuclear weapons will be driven more and more by humanitarian rather than just strategic concerns. So there are legal reasons for opposing nuclear weapons. There are also fiscal reasons. There are better things to spend the money on. We need more international aid, not more bombs. And I believe not only would that be a sensible thing to do and hardly a radical thing to suggest, it would also better serve the security of the world. There are also military reasons. Our international peacekeeping, our involvement in some of the current tragic conflicts of the world, nuclear weapons are no use. And of course there are all sorts of moral reasons. But speaking to you as the Christian campaign for nuclear disarmament, yes, all that is true. I want to remind us that our starting point is God. And our starting point is God as God is known to us in Jesus Christ. Because Jesus Christ said in St. John's Gospel to his friends, that is to us, on the night before he died, I leave you peace. Not as the world gives peace, do I give you peace. A peace which in the words of the famous blessings, a peace which passes all understanding. It is that vision of peace, that vision of reconciliation, that vision of all things gathered together in Christ, which is the starting point for my opposition of nuclear weapons, and I'm sure for yours as well. A few years ago there was an advertisement on the telly which I think was trying to sell insurance of one sort or another, and it said, there was a picture of planet Earth from space, and it said, I'm not sure this is true by the way, but it said the only thing that, the only human construct that you can see on Earth from space is the Great Wall of China. Well, that might be true, but that's what it said, and it then went on to say, that's the basic human instinct. The basic human instinct is security. The Great Wall of China, buy this insurance. And as I sat looking at the advertisement, not only did I profoundly disagree with the idea that the most basic human instinct was security, I found myself thinking not what is the only human construct that can be seen on Earth, as it were, from the heavens, but what is the only human construct that can be seen from Earth in heaven? And the answer to that question is, of course, the marks of the nails, the wounds of Christ, which we are told Christ bears for eternity. The marks and the scars of suffering love, the signs of the greatest love of all, which is to lay down your life for your friends, and of course even for your enemies. The love which goes the second mile, the love that turns the other cheek, the love that tells us that actually the most basic human instinct is not defense, not security, but self-giving and sacrificial love. Indeed, the scriptures say to us that, yeah, we can probably imagine laying down our life, possibly for someone we love. But God in Jesus Christ lays down his life for all of us, to witness to that peace which is beyond understanding, that reconciliation which is more than the silence after the guns have finished firing, something which transcends the conflicts and the sorrows and the horrors of the world. That's the reason that I oppose nuclear weapons, because of the peace and the vision of God's well-being that I see in Jesus Christ. And yes, there's all sorts of legal, fiscal, military and moral reasons as well, but it is Christ, the one who breaks down barriers, the one who deconstructs all our defences, the one who gives us access to God, which is the reason that we Christians work for peace.
Now, one of the things he mentioned there was the UN ban treaty, and one of the first states to ratify the ban treaty was the Holy See, the Vatican. And behind that, of course, is the work of Pax Christi, amongst many other things. And they've been doing fantastic work both here in the UK and around the world. And it's a great privilege to have with us this evening Marie Dennis, who is a senior advisor at Pax Christi International in New York. Another advantage of having a Zoom meeting. And we're going to hand over to Marie now, who's going to tell us a bit about what Pax Christi International has been up to recently on the nuclear weapons issue. Marie, over to you.
Thank you very much, Russell. It really is a delight to be with all of you, even virtually. I have known of your work for decades, and I am really honored to be here. I know among you, there are probably, there's certainly many who could give this little presentation better than I can, but I'm very glad to be with you. I was asked to say a few words about what the Vatican has been doing on nuclear weapons, especially in the context of the TPNW, about the role that Pax Christi has been playing, and about prospects for future developments. So I will try to do that. First, the Vatican. For all of us in the Catholic Church who have been working for nuclear abolition, for an end to the doctrine of deterrence as an excuse for maintaining, even upgrading nuclear arsenals, these have been very satisfying years, although they were a very long time in coming. From the beginning of the nuclear age, as you know, the Catholic Church called for nuclear disarmament and decried any, quote, act of war aimed indiscriminately against whole populations. But for a very long time, the Vatican was more ambivalent about a defensive posture based on nuclear deterrence. In his encyclical Pacem in Terris from so many years ago, 1963, Pope John XXIII was quite clear, rejecting military force and the, quote, so-called peace methodology of nuclear deterrence. He said that nuclear weapons had to be banned, and that would require a realization that true and lasting peace among nations could not consist in the possession of equal supply of armaments, but only in mutual trust. A few years later, the Catholic bishops at the Second Vatican Council engaged in a very intense debate about war and peace, and in particular, about the indiscriminate nature of nuclear weapons and the moral legitimacy of nuclear deterrence. In the final document of the Second Vatican Council, Gaudium et Spes, the Council clearly and without qualifications again condemned, quote, any act of war aimed indiscriminately at the destruction of entire cities or existing areas along with their population, but it stopped short of condemning nuclear deterrence because some regarded deterrence as, quote, the most effective way by which peace of a sort can be maintained between nations at the present time. Some years later, during the UN Special Session on Disarmament in 1982, Pope John Paul II encouraged every effort toward disarmament, but reiterated that in current conditions, quote, deterrence based on balance, certainly not an end in itself, but as a step on the way toward a progressive disarmament, may still be judged morally acceptable. That was in essence repeated in the US Catholic Bishops' Peace Pastoral, The Challenge of Peace in 1983, and remained unchanged for 30 more years until Pope Francis began to question any moral justification for nuclear deterrence. In a December 2014 message to the Vienna Conference on the Humanitarian Consequences of Nuclear War, the Holy See wrote, quote, now is the time to affirm not only the immorality of the use of nuclear weapons, but the immorality of their possession, thereby clearing the road to nuclear abolition. It was a signal of a major shift in official Catholic teaching that set the stage for the Church's support for the TPNW. I'm not sure that this very significant move was sufficiently noticed. I remember asking over and over again if that really was the intention, to move beyond deterrence, and was reassured that it was. So as a permanent observer state at the United Nations, the Holy See participated actively in the negotiation of the TPNW and was among 122 states that voted in favor of its adoption. Archbishop Paul Gallagher, the Secretary for Relations with States of the Holy See, signed the TPNW when it opened for signatures on September 20th in 2017, and that same day deposited the Holy See's instrument of ratification, making, as Russell said, the Holy See the first state to ratify that treaty. Then, a few months later, in November 2017, during a private audience with Nobel laureates, including ICANN, and those of us, including many of you that I can see on this meeting, who were participants in a major Vatican conference on nuclear disarmament, Pope Francis definitively condemned the very possession of nuclear weapons. Since then, the Vatican, particularly the Secretary of State and the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development, have continued to press for nuclear disarmament, encouraging Catholic bishops' conferences around the world, but most particularly in the nuclear states, to support the Holy See's position. And they have also been working with Catholic universities and Catholic organizations to organize and to reiterate support for Pope Francis' message. For example, in September of 2019, and the Vatican Secretary of State himself, Cardinal Parolin, hailed the TPNW as, quote, an important step toward a nuclear weapons-free world, and encouraged all signatory states to ratify it as soon as possible. Again, in 2019, during his visit to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Pope Francis repeated his condemnation of the use and the very possession of nuclear weapons as immoral, and specifically argued for support of the TPNW. During the high-level segment of the UN Conference on Disarmament this past February, Archbishop Gallagher repeated the Vatican's belief that a world free of nuclear weapons is both possible and necessary. He said that this conviction, reinforced by the entry into force of the TPNW, is also embodied in the spirit of the NPT, of the Treaty on Non-Proliferation, refusing the excuse of some nuclear states, including my own, the United States, including the excuse that some states, including my own, have used to reject the TPNW process altogether. He pointed out that the TPNW and the NPT are, quote, driven by the very same moral imperatives and objectives. They mutually reinforce and complement each other, demonstrating how zealous the desire for peace, security, and stability truly is. Intensifying its efforts through the Vatican COVID-19 Commission in the last year and a half during the pandemic, and in a very powerful effort to promote deep global transformation in a new post-pandemic normal, which Pope Francis speaks about over and over again. The Vatican has actually called for general and complete disarmament under effective systems of control and verification. It's fascinating. I'm not sure that we've lifted up clearly enough what the Vatican has been saying. Archbishop Gallagher made that specific point during the same speech last February, and in March, the dicastery itself hosted a major event entitled Advancing Integral Disarmament in Times of Pandemic to promote a global ceasefire in support of the UN Secretary General's pleas and to stop the production and proliferation of weapons. So the Vatican over the last few years has both moved its position on deterrence and even the possession of nuclear weapons, and has spoken out more and more forcefully about the disgrace of spending fortunes, not only on refurbishing nuclear weapons, but on the production of weapons and the marketing and trafficking in weapons all over the world. So a little bit about the Vatican. Now a bit about Pax Christi, and I have to start by saying Pax Christi in England and Wales clearly lead the way in our network, our global network on this issue. Pax Christi International, as you know, has been working for nuclear disarmament since we were founded over 75 years ago. Like you, we are strongly supportive of the TPNW and every other move toward abolition. We're very active members of ICANN, and our teams at the UN, particularly in New York, but bringing in representatives from other sections around the world, were very active in the negotiation of the TPNW, and we continue to be active in promoting the ratification of the treaty. Pax Christi International gathers a nuclear disarmament working group, which includes representatives from countries around the world, wherever Pax Christi has members involved in this issue, in order to develop a common strategy, to develop common resources, but also to support what are the necessarily regional and country-specific initiatives wherever our members are located. Right now, our common strategy is to promote the ratification of the TPNW, and many of our sections in different countries, and I want to single out our Pax Christi in the Philippines as having a really wonderful impact on the movement of their countries toward ratification. Among Pax Christi sections in Europe, including in England and Wales, Scotland, Germany, Belgium, Italy, France, and the Netherlands, many have been looking at where there might be openings to get nuclear weapons off European soil. And in the United States, we have been trying to move to smaller but real steps toward nuclear disarmament, beginning with our support for the Back from the Brink campaign, which, for example, supports a no first use commitment and an end to the massive expenditures that are programmed for the refurbishing and development of nuclear weapons in the next few years. Most Pax Christi sections are working with cities, with mayors, with legislative bodies, as well as with educational programs and social media campaigns to raise grassroots engagement in this issue. And many of us are supporting the disinvestment efforts like Don't Bank on the Bomb, which was actually initiated by our Dutch member organization, PAX, in the Netherlands. Looking into the future in terms of the Vatican and nuclear disarmament, I have to say that I am hopeful. Pope Francis has pretty well solidified a Catholic position against the very possession of nuclear weapons. I think the Holy See will continue that position and will look for ways to promote the abolition of nuclear weapons as a moral imperative into the future. I also believe that the Holy See will more and more encourage the development of practical measures to make that possible and of a global ethic that would make the realistic abolition of nuclear weapons reality. Practical measures will include, for example, the Holy See's support for what they're already calling for, which are new technologies to enhance the reliability of verification measures, and for concrete actions during the review session of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in accordance, they say, with our joint intention to achieve at the earliest possible date the cessation of the nuclear arms race and to undertake effective measures in the direction of nuclear disarmament. The Vatican, I believe, will always support the tireless recourse to negotiation, mediation, and arbitration that Pope Francis repeats over and over and over again, and articulated so clearly in his latest encyclical, Fratelli Tutti. On a more comprehensive level, though, our engagement as Pax Christi with the Vatican through our Catholic Nonviolence Initiative has convinced me that Pope Francis is moving the institutional Catholic Church toward a paradigmatic shift that will replace the just war tradition that has been at the center of church teaching on violence and war for, 1,500 years, with a global practical ethic built on nonviolence. In Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis moved the just war tradition to a back shelf in the Vatican, literally saying, quote, with increased globalization, what might appear as an immediate or practical solution for one part of the world initiates a chain of violent and often latent effects that end up harming the entire planet and opening the way to new and worse wars in the future. During the November 2017 Vatican Conference on Nuclear Disarmament, Bishop Robert McElroy from San Diego in the United States said, the church is in the midst of a fundamental reappraisal of how to balance the Christian obligation to nonviolence with the need to resist evil in the world. The traditional norms of just war, particularly jus ad bellum, increasingly appear to be incapable of effectively constraining violence in the modern world. The power of nonviolence, once relegated to the category of romantic idealism, has emerged as a potent force for social transformation and the building of lasting peace. We shall see. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie, and thank you for all that you've been doing in New York and everything that Pax Christi is doing around the world. We really love working with you guys, and it's a real blessing. Marie was saying there about the call from the Vatican for bishops' conferences to follow their lead, and one sign that is starting to happen is the fact that one of the Catholic bishops here in the UK joined with 6 other denominational representatives to sign a statement when the UK government said that it was going to increase its nuclear warhead size by over 40%. And that's an important statement that was coordinated by our friends in the Joint Public Issues team. And Patricia Pullum, I think, is standing by to read that to us now. So Patricia, over to you.
The government's decision in the integrated review of defence, security and foreign policy to increase the number of Trident nuclear warheads the UK can stockpile by more than 40% is a retrograde step that will not make any of us safer. Our Trident submarines already carry warheads that in total have an explosive yield equivalent to hundreds of the bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima. It is immoral that the UK government is committing resources which could be spent on the common good of our society to stockpiling even more. Over the last 50 years, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty has restricted the increase in the number of nuclear weapons worldwide, as well as the number of new nuclear-armed states. This announcement puts those gains in jeopardy and weakens collective action on non-proliferation. Progress on reducing the threat from nuclear weapons will come through dialogue, diplomacy, and principled action. The government's announcement today will complicate rather than aid this process. The entry into force of the United Nations Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is an encouraging development. As people of faith, we join with millions across the world who are working towards the elimination of nuclear arsenals. Living up to our responsibilities under the Non-Proliferation Treaty would be a step towards realizing that vision. We believe that global Britain should strive for peaceful and cooperative international relationships and a joint endeavour on climate change, global poverty, and other challenges. This announcement takes us in a worrying and wholly wrong direction. That was, as Russell said, signed by 7 denominations, church leaders from 7 denominations. And it's so good to see churches and church groups involved. In fact, this weekend, the Ursuline sisters in the UK have launched a petition, petitioning the government to engage and join with the TPNW. So do look them up, the Ursuline Sisters UK, for details and links to that petition, or ask us at CCND or Pax Christi. Thank you.
Thanks, Patricia. We'll make sure that that link is included in the pack that we send around afterwards. Now, one of the things that makes the TPNW different to a lot of other non-nuclear campaigning is the focus on humanitarian consequences of using nuclear weapons. So we've asked one of our new executive committee members, Bridget Tiller, if she'll just say a few words about that. So Bridget, over to you.
Hi everyone, my name's Bridget, and as Russell said, I'm part of the Christian CND exec this year. I've been asked to round off the evening by talking briefly about the humanitarian aspects of nuclear war and encouraging everyone to be thinking about how we should be framing the public conversation on this topic. Just to give a quick content warning, there will be brief mentions of death and injury. Too often, we are encouraged by governments and others to think about war as a pragmatic affair. Wars are portrayed as a means to an end and ultimately a necessity. This narrative is all the more prevalent when we talk about nuclear weapons. The government frame our nuclear stockpile as a deterrent, one that will ultimately keep us and others safe. They focus on words like security and have often said that these weapons preserve peace and prevent coercion. It's easy to see why governments prefer to keep the conversation here. The moment we stop to think about the staggering humanitarian consequences of dropping even a single nuclear weapon, especially in comparison to conventional weapons, the deterrent begins to feel a lot less safe and a lot less appealing. Only 2 nuclear weapons have ever been dropped at the end of World War II at Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. Around 215,000 people died immediately from these 2 bombs, and the devastating medical, psychological, and environmental effects continue to impact on survivors and their descendants. Each year, the number of recorded casualties from these bombs continues to grow and is now well over 300,000 from Hiroshima alone. In this way, nuclear war is fundamentally different from conventional warfare. The weapons we have today are many, many times more powerful than those that were dropped on Japan at the end of World War II. The warheads in UK's Trident arsenal are 8 times as destructive as the bomb that devastated Hiroshima. The scale of damage they could do is almost unimaginable. Each of the survivors and victims of these weapons will have a face, a name, and a story. They'll have goals and fears and favourite colours and opinions on the football. To quote Hiroshima survivor and disarmament campaigner Setsuko Thurlow, each person had a name. Each person was loved by someone. Let us ensure that their deaths were not in vain. It's a travesty that we're being encouraged to forget this through a rhetoric of security and safety, and it's one that we as Christians must rectify. Recentering the conversation about nuclear weapons on these stories and human consequences is a technique that's being increasingly employed by campaigning organisations. A key example is that of the TPNW, which includes clauses that focus on these impacts. And as a Christian, it's a narrative that particularly speaks to me. The Bible is full not only of references to peace and being peacemakers, many of which we've heard this evening, but also of instances where we are called to think about the individual humans and lives that impact and are impacted by each of our actions. Jesus reached out to and helped the poor, the sick, and the needy, and he related to them as individuals. He often flew in the face of convention and personal reputation in order to provide this love and support to people. He loved almost recklessly, and he asks us to do the same. Nowhere can we take this teaching on board more than in our attitudes to peace and nuclear weapons. I'd ask you all to come away from this celebration of 6 decades of peace activism, thinking on God's calling for us all to become peacemakers who love one another and our supposed enemies with the same commitment as Jesus.
Thanks, Bridget. That's a great way to finish our evening. Some real thought-provoking stuff there. So thank you for that. I'm just going to very briefly hand over now to Martin Tiller, who's also on the Christian CND exec, who's going to share some upcoming news on Christian CND. Martin.
Thanks, Russell. Well, personally, I've only been involved with Christian CND for about 6 years, and throughout that time, I've wished that I got involved sooner. And this evening's made me wish that even more. Perhaps I should have got involved back in the 1980s when I was a worried teenager, instead of just not thinking about it. Now, you may have some friends who are in exactly that situation that I was in back then, of being slightly worried about nuclear weapons, but not really thinking about it, not doing anything about it. If that's the case, please do them a favour and send them that link that I've just posted to join Christian CND, because as an organisation, we'll only succeed when we become quite a mainstream thing for Christians in the UK to be involved in. We need more people to get involved so that every Christian in this country knows about nuclear weapons, and many of them are involved in getting rid of them. And if you're not already a member yourself, please do join, because we need members, like any organisation, to increase our influence. We are not as big as we used to be as an organisation, but we are growing. We're growing quite rapidly at the moment, which is a great encouragement. But we need to continue to grow and get much, much, much bigger. So please do tell your friends and get more involved yourselves. A couple of things just specifically to mention. Thanks to a very generous legacy, we're currently recruiting an intern. So we're going to be taking a young person on for a year to work with Christian CND and to build our links with churches in particular. So we're pleased that we had 26 applicants for that role. So we're just going through the process now of selecting one, and we'll be interviewing on the 24th. So please do remember that process in your prayers. Pray that we'll get the right person to be our Christian CND intern for the coming year. And finally, from me, 2nd of October is a date for your diaries. That will be our annual conference and AGM. We're hoping, God willing, to meet in Newcastle this year because we haven't been up that way for a long time. So we'll be having the conference on the 2nd of October in Newcastle. It will be available online as well. But if you can put that date in your diary and travel up to Newcastle if you're comfortable doing that, it should be a really good day. So thank you very much. And I'll just hand back to Russell for the final word.
Thanks, Martin. So thank you everyone for coming this evening. I would like to say a special thank you to David Maxwell and Geraldine Ellis from the Christian CND committee, who have done so much work putting this together. This is an idea that started, I think, nearly 2 years ago. And I think you'll all agree that while there have been limitations of Zoom this evening, it's been a fantastic event. I'd also like to thank the speakers, especially Inderjit Bogal and Marie Dennis, who have served us so well this evening, and all of you for coming.